so talked about the fins of a fish. The other part of the definition, one of the other parts of the definition of fish is that they have gills. Their gills are used for breathing. Okay, so their gills are what they use to gather oxygen out of the water. They are pretty much the same. For a fish, they are what lungs are to us. Okay, so they use their gills to get oxygen. Oxygen is dissolved in the water. Okay, oxygen can get dissolved in the water through a variety of methods. If you have like animals, plants that do photosynthesis, like phytoplankton, kelp, seagrasses, okay, anything that does photosynthesis is going to release oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. And that oxygen will be dissolved in the water. Okay? And so that oxygen will be available to the fish. Also, where the surface of the water meets the atmosphere, okay, oxygen can diffuse from the atmosphere into the water, okay, and you can get oxygen that way. Also, where like you get waves and sort of turbulence in the water, that will create little bubbles in the water and can allow for oxygen to get dissolved in the water. How many of you have ever taken like a bottle of soda before you open it, right? And then like you crack the top, and then what happens to it? Yeah, like all of these bubbles start to form in it. Okay, all of the bubbles start to form in it, and basically what you had was gas that was dissolved in the water, okay? And then when you release the pressure, all that gas comes out. Okay, so before you undo the top, okay, you've got all of that gas dissolved in the water. You've got all sorts of gas that's dissolved in the water. Oxygen is like water in that it will move from areas where there's a lot of oxygen to where there's not as much oxygen. Okay, so remember last semester when we talked about like osmosis and how water moves from where there's not a lot of salt to where there's more salt, okay, and how it tries to reach equilibrium with equal amounts of salt and water. Oxygen does the same thing. So if there's more oxygen here, less oxygen here, it's going to diffuse to where there's less oxygen to try and reach equilibrium. Okay, keep that in mind. We're going to talk about the structure of the gills, and then we're going to talk about how they actually extract oxygen from the water and why fish can breathe underwater and you can't. All right? Why, if you breathe in, it's called drowning, whereas they can actually breathe and survive. Okay? Okay, so here's the structure of the gills. There's 4 major parts to the gills. You've got the gill arches, the gill rakers, the filaments, and lamellae. Okay? The gill arches are basically a bone, okay, or a piece of cartilage that supports the gill. Okay? And that, see the green line that's on the screen? That's the gill arch. Okay? The filaments, those are the blue lines. Those extend out from the gill arch, and on the filaments is where gas exchange will take place. Extending out of the front of the arch, you have these things called gill rakers. Okay, so these things stick forward, and they're bone or cartilage extensions of the gill arch, and they help to protect the gills. So the gills are actually open to the mouth of the fish. So that's why if you look at a fish and you watch a fish swim around, it does that weird like thing where it like opens its mouth. Okay, what it's doing is letting water come in, go over its gills, and then the water exits out of their body. All right. So anything that comes in with that water could potentially go over the gills and damage the gills of the fish. So they've got these extensions that stick out that help to protect the gills from anything that might get in them. All right. Make sense? Okay. On each of these filaments, you have these things that are called lamellae. Okay, that help to increase the surface area of the fish's gills. Surface area is really, really important for fish gills because they want a big surface area so that they can do lots of gas exchange. So essentially, you want lots and lots of surface area, okay, so that you can do lots of gas exchange. That's better than having just a little bit. Okay, if you just have a little bit, not much gas exchange can take place. So the lamellae increase the surface area. So if you think of like a string, okay, think of like the string as being the filament. Okay, lamellae are little plate-like structures. Here's my plates. okay, that are on that string that help to increase the surface area. So you've got a bunch of lamellae like all back to back like that. Okay, so if you compare the surface area of that to just one single string, okay, if you have a little string, you've got like this much surface area. If you take that, run that through the middle here, you now have that surface area and then all of this surface area and this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. So you've got a lot more surface area, right? So the lamellae help to increase the surface area of the fish's gills, which allows for gas exchange to take place. There's another picture to help you see it. Okay. Fish, osteichthyes, these bony fish, have 4 pairs of gills on either side of their head. Okay, so they've got 4 gill arches. Right, so if you think like they've got like 4 on either side. Okay, and then attached to each of those gill arches are going to be 2 rows of filaments. Okay, so you've got 4 gill arches and then 2 rows of filaments on either of these. So total, a fish will have 8 gill arches, right, and then 16 rows of filaments. Yes? Okay. And you can see on the picture like the little bumps? Those are the lamellae. Those represent the lamellae. And then here's like your little plate-like structures. Okay? All right. Countercurrent circulation. So this is why fish can breathe underwater and you can't. Okay? They have this thing that's called countercurrent circulation. Okay? What that means is that the blood that's coming into the fish's gills is moving in the opposite direction as the water that's flowing over the gills. Okay, so they're going in opposite directions. That allows for them to get lots of oxygen and to survive underwater. Why? How? Why does that matter? Here's why. We're going to look at what happens when blood and water flow in the same direction and then compare that to when they move in opposite directions, and hopefully you'll see why that helps them. All right? Ready? Okay. So this top one, okay, this top like blue line will represent the water flow, and this bottom kind of like purple pink line will represent the blood flow. Okay? So let's say that water is coming into the gills with 100% oxygen available, okay, for the fish. And the blood is now coming into the gills. It's given up all its oxygen to the cells of the body, and it's coming in ready for oxygen, and let's say it has 0% oxygen. Remember, oxygen moves from areas of high concentration to low concentration. So is there a difference between the concentrations here? Yeah. So is oxygen going to diffuse into the blood to try and equalize that? Yes. Because there's more oxygen here, less oxygen here, the oxygen is going to move to try and change that difference, equalize that difference. Yes? Okay. As the water keeps moving through and the blood keeps moving through, let's say you're now at 80% oxygen in the water and 15% in the blood. Is there still a difference there? Yeah. So oxygen is going to move in. Yes? Okay. How about keep going? 60 and 30. Is there still a difference? Yeah, so oxygen's going to move in, right? How about 50-50? No. So at this point, you've reached equilibrium. You have 50% concentration in each. Diffusion stops happening. Okay, so if the blood and the water went in the same direction, you get about halfway through, and you're done. Okay, so the fish gets about 50% oxygen, 50% of the oxygen that's available, and that's all they get because they've reached equilibrium. Does that make sense? Here's what happens when they flow in opposite directions. So here's the water coming in, okay, again, the blue-green line, and then the blood coming in this way, okay? When the water comes in, it's got 100% oxygen, okay? The blood that is meeting this water that just came in has gone through the gills, has picked up some oxygen, but it's at, let's say, 90% oxygen. So you have 190%. Is there still a difference? Can diffusion still take place? Yeah, because there's still a difference, right? So more of it can diffuse in. If you keep going and you go to the other end, okay, water that's leaving the gills will be at 5% oxygen. Water that's, or blood that's just coming in will be at 0. Is there still a difference? So can diffusion still take place? Yes. So because these flow in opposite directions, diffusion can happen throughout the entire time that the blood and the water are in the gills, and the fish now gets 90% of the available oxygen rather than 50. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's called countercurrent circulation. And we actually see this kind of system or setup where things run in opposite directions a lot in biological systems. So you have this in your body as well. Dolphins and whales and stuff will use this to stay warm. Okay, and we're actually going to be applying this concept, and you'll hopefully see it in the data from your lab that you're going to do. Okay, so you're actually going to do countercurrent circulation and see what your results are. All right, does that make sense? One more thing, and then we'll be done. Oh, and because we get countercurrent circulation, fish can get enough oxygen to survive, and we have fish that live in the ocean. Yay for pretty fish. Okay. A picture to show you. So these are the lamellae. Okay. This shows you that the water flows this way, okay, and the blood flows this way through the gills. Another picture. Okay. So after the blood picks up all of this oxygen, it then needs to go and transport it to all of the cells of the fish's body so that it can be used for cellular respiration to power the cells of the fish and keep it alive. The way that it gets there